All right, we're at the 2018 Ripcord reunion and talking with Frank Hills of Sewanee, Georgia. Okay. Now, to begin with, give us some background on yourself and where and when were you born?
I was born in Hartford, Connecticut, 1943.
Okay. Now, did you grow up there or did you move around?
I grew up through my senior year in college. My senior year in high school. I went to the University of Iowa, and people say, why'd you go from Connecticut to Iowa? Because I had an athletic scholarship and was about as far away from home as I could get.
Okay. And what was your family doing for a living when you were a kid?
My mom was a school teacher.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was an engineer at Pratt Whitney Aircraft in East Hartford, Connecticut.
Okay. Now, was he doing that during World War II, or was he in the service? Or
He was in the good war, the big one. He was in the Pacific with the 11th Airborne Division.
Okay. Did he drop in the Philippines with them, or?
He jumped on Corregidor.
Okay. Well, people often don't know. We get a little bit of paratroop work there over there, and he's part of that. All right. Did he talk about that at all when you were a kid?
Not much. In those days, my parents were Depression people who grew up in that time, and when the war was over, my dad came home and went to work.
Okay. All right. So what sport did you have a scholarship in?
Football.
Okay. Iowa football. All right. And I don't know, was there kind of a culture shock going out to Iowa from Connecticut?
In 1961, Connecticut was far different than it is today. Very far different. I never had a car in high school, and you never traveled too far from home. When you're 18 years old, it's not too much of a culture shock because there's a lot of other 18-year-old kids that are there in school.
All right. And so did you graduate on schedule in 65?
I graduated in 66.
Okay.
Playing sports, I didn't always take a full load.
Okay.
So it took me an extra 2 semesters to get out.
All right. So did you actually play on Iowa's football team?
Yes.
Okay. And what position did you play?
Defensive back.
Okay. And how'd that go?
I played. I didn't go as a defensive back. I went as a quarterback.
Oh.
But coach saw things different. Said, I'm gonna make you a defensive back. So that was fine.
All right. So you graduate in 66.
Yep.
Now, by this time, there's a war going on in Vietnam, and the draft is ramping up quite a bit. Did you consider enlisting, or did you have other plans?
I went to law school.
Okay.
And my dad called me. I had been in law school my second semester, and I got a phone call from my father and said, I've got a letter here from the Selective Service. I said, well, open it up. Well, that was my draft notice. What I did is I called the board and I asked them to give me an extension so I could finish the semester.
Right.
And they did. So when I got that, I knew I was going to go in the Army. I went down to a recruiter and I said, look, I got drafted, but I have an extension. I want to enlist because I want to go to officer candidate school. So, and this was Chicago.
Okay. Where were you going to law school?
I was going to Kent College of Law,
Okay.
part of Illinois Institute of Technology.
Okay.
So I took the tests, had an interview, and they said, okay, when do you want to go in? I said, well, I'll go in January as soon as I finish the semester. And one thing led to another, and I went in the Army in 1968.
Okay. Now, at this point in time, how much did you know about Vietnam?
I knew some things. I knew where it was. I knew what was going on. The protests had not really started that much. I think you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
They got ramped up after. I think they got ramped up about 1969.
Well, certainly 1968. You
Yeah.
know, that's the King and Kennedy assassinations, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
the Democratic convention. If you were in Chicago at
I
that
was-
point, you'd have known that.
I was in Chicago when His Honor was
Yes,
the mayor.
Mayor did, yeah. But then, of course, when you had the Democratic convention in Chicago in the summer of '68,
Yeah.
then things got pretty crazy
Yeah.
as well. But by then, you're on your way off to training and elsewhere. And at Kent College of Law, I mean, an IIT, that would not be a place that would have been a real hotbed, probably, of anti-war activity.
No.
Yeah. And Iowa at that time, when you were there, probably not so much either.
No.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So you go. You had your year of law school now, and now do you go through? You've enlisted in the Army. Initially, are you going in as an enlisted man at this
I'm
point?
going in as an enlisted man. What it did when I enlisted and was accepted into OCS, there was no break in service.
Mm-hmm.
So I went in, I went to Fort Polk, Louisiana for basic training, Fort Leonard Wood for advanced individual training, and then Fort Benning for 6 months of OCS training.
Okay. So, what was basic at Fort Polk like?
The reason I had a choice of where I wanted to go. And I went in, I could have gone to Fort Leonard Wood, Fort Dix, or Fort Polk. Well, this was Chicago. It was wintertime.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Fort Polk because it was Louisiana. It was a little warmer.
Okay.
So then, when I was done with that, they shipped me to Fort Leonard Wood.
Right. Okay. But okay. But what actually happens in basic down there when you were there?
Usual basic, nothing of any significance. Just one of the, many people going through.
Okay. But physically, what do you have to do?
I was in pretty good shape when I got there, so there was nothing that I couldn't handle.
Okay. So there's physical training that you do. You're marching around and that kind of stuff. What about? I mean, a lot of people when they talk about basic, they talk about the emphasis on discipline and obeying orders and all that kind of thing. Now you were a little bit older going into that than a lot of the other guys. How did you deal with or handle that, or how did the drill instructors deal with you?
Well, they made me a squad leader. So since I had some training in college, they made me a squad leader since I was like 3 years older.
Yeah.
I'd already graduated from college, and there was a lot of 18 or 19-year-old kids coming in, just the wet behind the ears. So they thought I could help them out a little.
Okay. And basically, how did the drill instructors treat the trainees?
Probably they wouldn't be able to do what they did at that time today. Today it's touchy-feely. We don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and times have changed. We're talking 1968, and what are we, 2018? Long time ago.
Yeah.
We don't want to hurt anybody's feelings today.
All right. So there's verbal abuse. I don't know.
Oh, verbal abuse, yeah, that was just normal.
Okay.
Depending upon your makeup, just rolled off my back. You have to know what they're trying to do. Don't take it personally.
Yeah. So did you have a little better feel for that than the younger guys, or?
I think I did.
Okay. All right. But you were in good physical shape going in, given your background and the rest of it, so you could handle that kind of thing, and you understood the game. And the instructors didn't get too perverse then.
No.
Sort of break people down, build them back up, that kind of
They
thing.
did that in OCS.
That's another level. Okay. All right. Now, when you went to Fort Leonard Wood, what was the focus of the AIT there?
Engineering. We built bridges. We built a lot of bridges, and we did a lot of that type of work. Harassment was not there. There was always some harassment, but we worked every day. We went out in the field, we did this and we did that, but a lot of engineering work, so there was no harassment. You came in, you were tired, and they left us alone. It was completely different.
Right. Okay. Now, how long did those training sessions go?
8 weeks for both.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty much the standard at that point.
Yeah.
All right. And then you go on then, and you go directly from the AIT then into OCS.
Had a week off.
Week off. Okay.
Then I showed up at Fort Benning in June,
Okay.
and it was hot.
All right. So describe what the OCS program consisted of.
26 weeks. You signed up for 26 weeks at a double time. You were always running. We started with about 235 candidates, and I think we graduated anywhere from 155 to 160. A lot of dropouts, a lot of people quit. But just the nature of the beast. They couldn't. The object was to get rid of people. If you couldn't cut it, you're out. I just went along with the system.
Okay.
Don't take anything serious.
All right. What specific skill set did they try to give you?
At that time, there were various OCS classes. There was a artillery OCS at Fort Sill, engineering OCS at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, armor OCS at Fort Knox,
Yeah.
infantry OCS at Fort Benning, etc., etc. As we speak today, there was one OCS. It's branch in material. When you're done with OCS, then you go to your basic branch, whatever that branch may be. So this was pretty much strictly infantry. And that's what we did. Tactics, mortars, all types of weapons, a lot of field exercises.
Okay, so map reading and that kind of thing.
Map reading, day, night, what have you. Yeah.
Okay. Did they give you much by way of weapons training, or did they leave that for the earlier levels?
The 45, which was we fired that. We fired M14s, we fired the M16, we fired the machine guns from the M60 to the 50 cal.
Okay.
We fired mortars. We had to know how to adjust fire.
Okay.
We fired artillery pieces, know how to adjust fire.
Okay. So you're trained to call in artillery fire
Yes.
and that kind of thing? Yeah. All right. And what kinds of people did you have as instructors at Fort Benning?
Most officers, captains, a lot of captains who had come back from Vietnam, they were the primary instructors.
And how much of their experience in Vietnam did they share with you? Did not directly, or?
Not much. As far as one-on-one conversation, not much at all.
Okay. So this is still kind of, it is generic training on some level.
It's generic. There's classroom and there's classroom and there's field work every week.
Okay. Now, you're doing this in 1968. There was a reasonable expectation that most of the officers who got through that would go to Vietnam.
Infantry OCS, you're going.
Yeah. Now, so did they have exercises geared specifically to Vietnam?
No. I don't want to be emphatic on that.
Okay.
They did not have a lot.
Okay.
But they said this is what you need to know, and they gave you small hints. But once you graduated, you would have been assigned to some form of a division in the United States, and you would have gone through various Vietnam scenarios.
Okay. So somewhere along the line, in principle, somebody gives you
Right.
training. It sometimes happens and sometimes doesn't.
Right.
But okay. All right. So you make it through the 26 weeks. So now we've gotten basically to the end of 68 pretty much. All right. What's your next step from there?
Well, what happened was, I want to say maybe there was 3 weeks to go. A couple lieutenants came over with some dogs, and they said, we're looking for volunteers to join this program, Scout Dogs. Now people say, well, what do Scout Dogs do? The Scout Dog program, they walk point for infantry units. At the lowest level would be a platoon. And you had to go to jump school, you had to go to ranger school, and then you had to go to Scout Dog school. And if I'm not mistaken, there were 4 of us in my class that put their hands up in the air. I said, I'm gonna try this. You know, they say don't volunteer for anything,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I volunteered.
Okay. So when do you start? So, you know, you've got it. So it was jump school first, then Ranger school.
Yep, and then I signed in, the Scout Dog training was right there at Fort Bennington, so I never left.
Okay, so they did jump school there, and
Jump school
and
was
Ranger,
there.
a lot of Ranger schools there
Right.
anyway. Too. Okay. How long was the jump school?
3 weeks.
Okay. And what basically did that consist of?
You got ground week, you have tower week, and then you jump out of an airplane. You make 5 jumps.
Okay, explain what Tower Week is.
Hopefully, a lot of people have seen it on TV or some of the old shows. They have these towers that are 250 feet high. They bring you up in a parachute and they cut you loose, and parachute comes to the ground, and you practice your parachute landing fall, and you're good to go.
All right. Now, are you attached to anything from the tower that will catch you and keep you from?
The parachute is.
Okay.
The parachute is attached. You know, it's like, if I can describe it, it's like an upside down calendar, you know? It's upside down, parachute goes up, and then they cut you loose and you drift to the ground.
Yeah. So it's about as safe as they can make it at that
Yes,
point.
yeah. Not that you can't get hurt, but during ground week, you're over and over and over again practicing parachute landing falls.
Kind of jumping off of platforms or things like that. Yeah. Okay. Now, when you got to the actual jumping out of airplane part, did you enjoy that?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I did. There was nothing to it after. You know, the army teaches you by rote, over and over and over again, so you know what's going to happen. It's not like, I think if you went to a skydiving club, they'd give you an hour of instruction and send you up in an airplane. Well, I had 2 weeks of instruction.
So by then you were just ready to get it over with.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Now, Ranger School is a little bit more elaborate than that, right?
Yeah, that's an endurance course. No sleep, small unit tactics. It just prepares you. Probably the best course there is. Prepares you for what to expect in Vietnam. It's a great course.
So you're doing escape and evasion things, or just
No.
trying to operate. You're giving him a mission, and you have to just operate.
You're given scenarios. Everyone is in charge at one time or another, and that's what they give you. Practical, tactical exercises. Small unit.
Now, do they do all of that at Benning, or do they move you around?
You got Fort Benning. You have Dahlonega, the mountain course, then Eglin Air Force Base, the wet course.
That's the swamp course.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, and all of those potentially can resemble parts of what you might get in Vietnam, depending on where you were.
Absolutely,
Okay. And the instructors there, are they Rangers themselves?
All of them.
Okay. All right. So, and how long was that? Was that 12 week or
8 weeks.
8 weeks? Okay.
Maybe 8 weeks is the course. I think maybe we were there maybe 4 days early. Yeah.
Okay. So through all of that, and then Scout Dog School next.
Then I came back to Fort. I was there at Fort Benning, came back, and I went over to the Scout Dog School, where it was located.
Okay. Now the Scout Dog program is something that we might have vaguely heard about, but are not going to maybe know a whole lot about. So when you went to that training, kind of take us through that. What were you doing there?
Well, first of all, as an officer, I had a class. I was the class leader.
Okay.
But I did what the class did. I had a dog assigned to me. Every student in the class had a dog assigned to him. It takes a couple days to get acclimated to the dog, and it was approximately 8 weeks. And you go through and you just, the instructors are great. Most of them were all Vietnam veterans that came back. The Scout Dog program, there were 3 types of dogs. Scout dogs walk point for infantry units. There was a phrase that the Scout dogs had: early silent warning. They would let you know that something was not right. when we got there, I'm jumping ahead, when I got to Vietnam, we still trained over there, but we used Vietnamese. We would put them out and we'd take the dogs out and let them alert on the Vietnamese. That's one type of dog program. We also had mine dogs that could detect explosives. We practiced with that all the time. And then I had tracker teams. They were assigned to me. I think I had 3 tracker teams. That's 3 guys and a Labrador. For instance, if there was an ambush and there was a blood trail, you wanted to follow it, bring in a tracker team. That's how that worked. But the primary requirements or use were for scout dogs.
Okay. So when you were doing a training in the States, was that for all kinds or just for the scout dogs?
It was just for the scout dogs.
Okay. All right. So were most of the trainees enlisted men?
All of them were.
Okay. All right. So they recruited you guys out of your OCS class basically to be leaders for these units. And then did you go with the men you trained to Vietnam, or did they reassign you at that point?
Originally, when the Scout Dog platoons deployed, they deployed lock, stock, and barrel. Handlers, dogs, company commander, what have you. They went lock, stock, and barrel. But as you know, during the Vietnam War, continual replacements were coming in. So, to answer your question, no, I went over as a replacement. And the soldiers who were the dog handlers all volunteered for it. They weren't drafted into that program. They had to volunteer for it.
Right. Now, when did you actually then go to Vietnam?
I went over in 1970.
Okay. Roughly what month or time of year?
I want to say March 1970.
Okay. And did you stay in Vietnam a full year, or did you come back early?
I stayed a full year.
Okay. Make sure I have that in the notes. Okay. All right. So early 1970. Now, you've now been in the Army for some time.
Yep.
Training various kinds
Yep.
of places. Now, during all this training, how much attention were you paying to the course of the Vietnam War?
Well, I knew it was there and I knew I was going. So, it was a foregone conclusion. If you were an infantry officer, graduated from OCS, you're going.
Now, did you think about it politically at all, or whether or not it was a good idea, or did you just stay out of that?
Kind of stayed out. TV at that time was not the way it is today. So, what was it, a 6 o'clock news or 5 o'clock news? That's what you got. It's not like 24/7 that we have today.
Yeah.
Different time, different era.
Yeah. So you could really kind of tune it out if you had other things to do.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So now you get to the early 1970, you're going to Vietnam. Do you get a leave after dog school, or?
I had a 2-week leave. Now, I went over, I knew I was going. I went over specifically. I flew out of Travis Air Force Base. So I flew from Hartford, Connecticut to Travis Air Force Base in San Francisco area. So I got there and I spent a day there, and then they told me to come back at 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Your flight's gonna go. So I came back, and I remember it was Braniff Airlines? Well, this was a nice big orange airplane. You can't miss it. So anyway, flew to Vietnam, landed at Tan Son Nhut Airport. That was in Saigon, and they took us to, I think it was the 90th Replacement Company. Well, when I got there, I had a phone number to call. So I called the U-Survey Dog Detachment, United States Army Republic Vietnam Dog Detachment. I said, hey, this is Lieutenant Hills, I'm here. They said, we'll be over in a couple hours to get you. So I never really spent a night in the 90th Replacement.
Okay.
They picked me up. I spent a week in Long Binh, just getting somewhat acclimated to the
Yeah. What
climate.
was your first impression of Vietnam when you got there?
Well, kind of smelled. There's a smell about it. There's a smell. It was hot and it smelled. Not being derogatory,
Yeah.
but there was a. I know you probably heard that from other people.
That I always ask,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
you never know.
Yeah.
All right. Now, while you're first there, I mean, going from Tan Son Nhut to Long Bin or whatever, did you pay any attention to the scenery or what the place looked like?
Yes, I had seen that. Now I'm gonna a little sidelight. All the press, UPI, API, all the news people hung around Saigon.
Yeah.
So what you saw is they'd go out in the rice paddies with the First Cavalry Division or what have you. They never wanted to venture too far out. So I think the American public had the perception that Vietnam was all rice paddies, which it wasn't. It's a beautiful country, but they just saw that Saigon area, and I think the First Cav was there, and there was a couple other units that were there.
Yeah, First Infantry Division,
Yeah.
9th Division, things like that. Cav was often
Yeah.
someplace else, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, after a week at the dog training detachment, they're just getting somewhat brought into the picture. They said, okay, we got an assignment for you. I said, okay, where is it? They said, you're going to the 101st Airborne Division, 3rd Brigade. That's great. Where is it? So it couldn't get any farther north. If I got any farther north, I'd have been in North Vietnam.
All right.
So, took me to the airport. Took me 3 changes of aircraft to get there. And I got there, and somebody from the 58th Scout Dog Platoon picked me up. I never had to go through the Screaming Eagle Replacement Training School. They brought me right to the unit, and I started from there.
All right. Now, what was home base for the unit?
Camp Evans. That was pretty far north,
Yeah.
just south of the DMZ.
It's not all the way up to Quang Tri, but it's north of Way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and that was the 3rd Brigade's one, and so forth. Okay. What sort of reception do you get when you join the unit, or what happens once you get there?
Well, I got there. I just, the typical signing in, make sure I sign the orders and what have you, and then I was replacing the platoon leader who was rotating out. So I spent a week with him,
Okay.
and then he rotated out, and there I was. I had a good first sergeant. So it takes time. It takes time to get your feet wet and what have you.
Okay. Now, how helpful was that first week with the old guy there?
It was somebody to turn to if you have questions. He was there to take my hand. How's that sound? Lead me around. My boss was the S3 of the 3rd Brigade, 101st Airborne Division.
Okay.
That was my boss.
Now, explain for a general audience, what does S3 refer to?
The S3 of a brigade, he was a Brigade 3, he was a major. He was in charge of operations. S2 is intelligence. S3 does the operations. The 58th platoon was one of his assets. He had the 58th Scout Dog Platoon. He had a Ranger platoon that did the long range reconnaissance. He had a Ready Reaction Force. These units all reported to him. Of course, he reported to the brigade commander.
Right. Okay. And who was the brigade commander at that point?
There was a, well, you're asking me.
Oh,
I think it was Harrison.
Probably not yet.
Ben
There
Harrison.
was a Colonel Bradley. who
No, Colonel Bradley was a battalion commander.
No, he was the brigade commander.
Was-
Military historian, I'm sorry.
Okay,
That's
okay.
But he didn't make an impression, but Bradley didn't make a particular impression on you, or he wasn't there, you weren't overlapping with him long enough for that to
No,
register.
because Harrison,
Because Harrison comes in not
Yeah.
too long after you get
because
there.
I had two brigade commanders. I had Ben Harrison and David Grange. David Grange went on to get 3 stars. I kind of, as a lieutenant, I met him. I just kind of stayed in the background,
Yeah. that sort of thing.
Didn't want to open my mouth and put my foot in it, so.
Okay, so when you get there, so March 1970, April,
Yeah.
what's going on in the brigade at that point? Or what do they have you doing?
Well, okay, now, to get a scout dog team, they just have to request it. So every day, myself or my platoon sergeant, if I wasn't out in the field with one of my dog handlers and a dog, I had to go up to brigade. I had to let the Brigade 3 know how many teams I had out in the field
Right.
and how many I had in waiting. And he wanted to know this. And it also forced me to go to the, every day they had a brigade meeting, and it lets you know what was going on in the whole AO. I knew what was happening. Even though I stood in the back of the room, I got the big picture, which a lot of these platoon leaders in the field didn't know what was going on. They were told, you go here or you go there, this is what you're gonna do, you're gonna search this area. I knew what was going on. I knew who was out there, I knew who was in contact. So, looking back, it's something that I was thankful for.
All right. Now, the point when you come in, this is the point when the operations that sort of become the Ripcord campaign started to happen. The fire base is established in April, and you have fighting in the area around that until the siege in July. Now, that kind of period, March, April, May, what kind of things were the Scout Dog units doing, and what were they finding?
Well, they weren't finding anything, but they were, now, let me rephrase that. They were alerting on what
Right.
was out there.
Right.
Okay? The dogs don't find anything, but
Yeah.
we, the platoons are out there maneuvering whatever AO that company is in. And again, as I said before, the dogs would give early silent warning. There's something there. Different terrain, very mountainous terrain I was in. Uphill, downhill, nothing was open. It was really tough terrain to operate in. Not like the Delta, not like the troops sloshing through the water. The mountains, a very beautiful area. I don't have any desire to go back, but it's picturesque.
Now, how soon before you were going out with the dog teams, or were you doing that even the first week?
Probably about a month.
Okay. And why did you go with them?
Just one, I felt as though I had to. Two, I wanted to see what was going on out there. I mean, I wanted to see it. I wanted to see the actual dogs in operations. Different operating in the United States, different operating in training in Vietnam. So you're out there. Where I was, there was no good guys. It was all bad guys. It was Indian country.
So if they noticed pretty much anything, that could be serious.
If they threw an alert, normally there was something out there. It was an enemy soldier, or more than one.
Okay. Now, how dangerous was Scout Dog duty?
Not the best, but that's why I was all volunteer for these guys. They had to walk point. They're out there in front of everybody. And when a dog threw an alert, if you looked at the dog, you could tell how strong it was. You better hit the ground. Don't stand there and look around, because something's out there. You just learn from experience. Get down, get behind something. A lot of times now, it's possible it could have been a booby trap out there. There's a scent that remains. A dog could hit a booby trap accidentally, and that has happened too. But usually it's an asset for the platoons. So if you have the opportunity, use it. Use the dogs. You hate to lose a dog, but use it. It'll save your life.
Okay. Now, did you have a sense that Vietnamese took the dogs seriously, or would try to shoot them, or
Yeah, yeah, to answer your question, yeah, if they could shoot the dogs, they would. They knew what they were doing. I mean, they knew what the dogs would do. So it's not like it was a surprise to them.
I guess some infantry guys will talk about how North Vietnamese would sort of have priorities. You know, you pick off the officer and the radio man and the medic and the machine gunner and so forth. Were dogs particular targets, or were they might get shot at if they're in the wrong place?
You have to consider the type of terrain that you're in. Again, if you're down south and you're out in the open, different story. Up in the northern part of South Vietnam and I Corps, very mountainous. So the troops weren't necessarily out in the open all the time. They were fighting going uphill, downhill, and what have you. If the enemy had an ambush, a dog could usually alert on an ambush immediately. You would know by looking at the dog what type of alert it was. And if it was a strong alert, you know, hit the ground. I don't give you an example. I happened to be with a dog handler, and we were out there, and the dog threw an alert. I hit the ground. The dog handler hit the ground, grabbed his dog. The platoon leader came up and said, "What the hell's going on?" And he got shot. They opened up on him. Just, you know, I'm sorry about that, but don't ask what's going on, if you get my point, as far as things like that can happen.
Okay. Now, how far afield would you wind up going? I mean, you're not spending all your time at Camp Evans. Would you go out to fire bases?
Yes. I wouldn't stay on the fire base, but I'll just give an example. When it came to ripcord, the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Lucas, sent word back that he wanted to see me. He wanted myself and a sergeant to come out and talk to him. What he wanted to do is he wanted to put dogs on the fire base. And that's not the dog's mission. The dog's not going to tell you that. And I was a lieutenant at the time, and I basically told him in a nice way that the dog is not going to help you on the fire base. I said, you're in Indian country, and there's smells all over the place. So the dog really is not going to be an asset to you because you know what's out there. But your line units can have the dogs. Your platoons and your companies can have the dogs. All I have to do is request them. And he acquiesced, and he was happy I came out and told him what they can do and what they can't do.
Now, was he expecting them to kind of just be sort of on the perimeter of the fire base?
Yes, yeah, and that's the last thing you needed was a dog running around out there.
Did you form any particular impression of Lucas one way or another as an officer? Or?
He listened to me, you know, but he asked for my opinion. I mean, it's not that I said you can't have it. I just told him it's not going to help him out, but it's going to help his units out there around Ripcord and the other hills that were there.
Okay. Now, is this a period before the heavy bombardment on that hilltop? Because that was in July was when it was really bad.
Yeah, this was in June,
Okay.
and then all hell broke loose in July.
All right. Now, when you get some more intense firefights and things like that around Ripcord in July, and different companies run different kinds of problems. Were you sending dogs to them at that point, or were they going to other places instead? Or
I was sending the dogs to whoever requested them.
right.
Now, they all had to be part of the 3rd Brigade. I wasn't going to necessarily send dogs to the 1st Brigade because they had a Scout Dog Platoon down there. So whoever wanted them, they could have them. And the teams normally went out for 5 days.
Okay.
dogs would get tired.
Yeah. What did dog maintenance consist of? What do you have to do to look after the dogs?
Well, we had, you've heard of Army medics? We had vet techs. They were pretty good. We had a veterinarian in Fubai. We had, in fact, a couple veterinarians in Fubai. Now, the veterinarians, not only did they take care of our dogs, which was a small part of their job, they were in charge of inspection of all foodstuffs coming in. They made sure the drinking water was okay. Like today, if you saw TV and you saw Desert Storm and what have you, you saw the cases and cases of water that came in. Well, we didn't have that. I don't think we had designer water.
No.
Evian wasn't developed then. So they were responsible for water purification. They were responsible for anything came in as far as foodstuffs go.
And Fubai is where the division headquarters was. You've got
Yeah.
Brigade headquarters, Camp Evans, and Fubai is closer to Way. and
Camp
that's-
Eagle.
Yeah, Camp
Yeah.
Eagle, yeah, and that's where they are. But in the meantime, you've got enlisted men,
Right.
vet techs, who are actually taking care of the
The
dogs.
dogs, yeah.
Okay. What do they feed the dogs?
Well, let me tell you this. When a guy goes out in the field, he's carrying not only his own rations, he's carrying dog food. And he's carrying water. He's carrying a load of stuff. The dogs had, when they were in the rear, they had dry food. But out there they had little patties. They looked like hamburger patties. But the dog had to have water too.
Yeah.
And that was very important. So these handlers are carrying a lot of water and dog food. And that's 5 days worth of stuff, plus all his stuff that he's carrying.
Yeah. Did the dogs get tropical diseases?
They could get heat stroke. You could tell. I mean, the dogs, you had to stop. Sometimes the dog is worn out. He is scrambling the way the soldiers are scrambling. If you're going up a hill, he's going up the hill. And the tireder he gets, the less alert he's going to be. And just like a soldier,
Yeah.
the tireder a soldier is, the less alert he is.
All right. Now, how long did you stay doing that? Did you spend a whole year in
A
Vietnam
whole
doing
year.
that?
A whole year.
Okay. And then different things happen sort of militarily in that period. You had intense fighting kind of through Ripcord, and then it's kind of quieter in a lot of the brigade area. Then after that, and monsoon sets in and other things. Was there a rhythm or a pattern to what you did with the dogs, or did it always seem the same?
In the monsoon season, if my mind is correct, when you saw the monsoon season in Saigon, it rained every afternoon. When you're in the mountains, all day long. It was a mist. It would rain. You get socked in. It was miserable. You never dried out. You were always wet. Just a different, even though the country's not that big, I Corps is completely different than 2 Corps. Or 3 Corps, or 4 Corps, completely different.
Okay. And then how did the monsoon then affect what you were doing?
Well, it didn't affect me. I just did the same thing. As far as the units go, the same thing. Out looking for the enemy. But Vietnamization was coming up. That word, we were turning everything over to the South Vietnamese as fast as we could. It didn't work out so good in the long run, but that was the plan. Let them take the bull by the horns.
Okay. Now, did the South Vietnamese have dog units?
Yes.
Okay.
There was one in fact, I had to go down there a number of times to help them out. They were located in the old Capitol Way,
Yeah.
inside. I guess they were okay, I mean, I went down there, I watched them train. I don't know how much they used them. As I said, the Vietnamization was taking place, and the United States was pulling out, and they were trying to turn over as much of the combat operations as they could to the Vietnamese.
Yeah, so sort of less in the way for the American units to be doing in the field at that point. There aren't big American offensives after that.
No, after Ripcord was the biggest, and I think you know, and I didn't know it at the time, but they wanted to keep it quiet. They didn't want this publicized because we lost a lot of soldiers. 247 in a 4-month period, is that a correct number?
I think that's about
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
I mean, the Cambodian operation, which was started a little bit earlier, but it was over a little bit earlier, was a bigger thing, and that got a lot of the news.
Yeah.
But that was the one where they could present it as being essentially successful, and Ripcord, you couldn't quite do that with.
Right. Ripcord never made the papers. It did.
It did a little bit.
Yeah, because my mother sent me a clipping saying, in fact, this was the paper in Connecticut saying that the 101st abandoned
Yeah.
a fire base, and that's about it. That's all they said.
Yeah, and that's actually how it, to the extent that it appears in a lot of
Yeah.
the books about Vietnam, that's
Yeah.
about as much as most of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Now, what was your daily life like in Vietnam? How would you describe that? Because if you're on the base, what happens day to day?
Well, we had breakfast was if you're on Camp Evans. We were not self-sufficient. One of the aviation units had to feed us, which was fine, and we would trudge over there, and they would feed us, and then we come back, and almost like stateside, police call, make sure you'll clean the place up. I didn't care whether the guys made their beds or not, anything like their bunk beds or cots. That that didn't bother me. But if there's trash, pick it up. Then you take care of the dogs. Okay, fresh water. Most of the guys would take their dog and take them for a walk or groom them a little and what have you. I'd wait for the calls to come in, say, hey, first of the 506 needs a dog team, or they need 2 teams. And then I had a roster, or my first sergeant had a roster guy goes out in the field for 5 or 6 days, he goes to the bottom of the list. Just like anything was run,
Okay.
pretty uniform.
All right. Now, did you, on the base, you're there, was life on a base fundamentally different from being in the field?
Yeah, when a guy came in, the next day he'd have to clean his equipment. He'd have to clean everything. He'd have to repack his rucksack, clean his weapon, get cleaned up himself. There's probably no different. The best thing about this is the guys got to come in. They didn't have to spend 30 to 40 days out there.
Yeah.
So they're out 5 or 6 days, they're coming in. The dog needed a break. And then they go to the bottom of the list, and then the next guy up, the next team would go up, would call came in, they'd go out.
Okay. There are assorted stereotypes or things about kind of life on bases in Vietnam, and one of them has to do with drug use. I mean, were you aware of any of that going on around you, or was it more noticeable there?
It was there, I didn't look for it. One of my sergeants got caught coming in with I want to say heroin.
Could have been.
Well, first of all, I'm in my office, if you want to call it an office. I'm just in there, and CID comes in, and they said, "Do we have your permission?" Of course, I said, "Yeah. Just do what you need to do." Long story short, it cost him 6 months in a long bin jail. So he didn't get a dishonorable discharge, but yeah, it was there.
Okay. Were you aware of racial tensions?
I was aware of it, but I didn't have any. There was no problem where I was. I didn't have any. I wasn't around any units that that had it, but it was there.
Yeah. Well, sometimes there's stories about things going on bases where you
Yeah.
have kind of groups of black soldiers who
Yeah.
will take over certain areas or things like this and that kind of thing. But that wasn't something that you sort of
That
really
wasn't,
witnessed.
if my recollection is correct, it really wasn't a major problem with 3rd Brigade, 101st Airborne Division.
All right. Part of why I asked.
Okay?
Yeah, I want to find out what happens there. Okay. So you're getting, let's see, now, did you get an R&R while you were in Vietnam?
I did.
Okay, where'd you go?
Hawaii.
Okay. Mostly married guys went there.
Yeah.
Were you married at the time?
At the time.
Okay. And what was it like to be in Hawaii after X amount of time in Vietnam?
Well, you knew you were going back.
Mm-hmm.
So it took you a couple, only gone for a week. So you just get acclimated, and then it's time to go back. So it's, I don't know if it was good or bad,
How far into your tour had you gotten at that point?
Yeah, I want to say 6 months,
Okay.
6 or 7 months in. I thought it was time to go.
All right. Now, as your time in Vietnam wound down, did your duties change at all, or did you just stay doing the same thing the
Nope,
whole time?
same.
And then, when it was time to go, did you break in the new guy, or
I
was
had a
there?
new guy come in. He was with me a couple weeks. Didn't take him long to get his feet on the ground. Things were slowing down though. Things were slowing down.
Mm-hmm.
He was only there a couple of months when they closed everything down.
Okay. Now, what kind of casualties did your unit take while you were leading it?
When I was there, I had a number of people wounded. One guy killed. And
And how many dog handlers would you have at a time?
28 to 32,
Okay.
somewhere in that range.
Right. And how many might be out in the field at the same time?
Let's see. Normally, maybe I had 10 to 12 teams out.
Okay. All right. Now, for a lot of people who wind up kind of accidentally even becoming officers in the Vietnam era, they do their tour, they do the minimum number of years they're supposed to serve, and then they're out. When you got to the end of Vietnam, what did you do?
I went back to the States. I stayed in, and actually, I think it was a blessing that I stayed in. I could blend back into society gradually. That's the problem with the Vietnam War, in that they just turn people loose. Go on home. Where you been a year? Go back to work, if that's possible.
Okay. At what point did you decide to re-up and stay in?
I think when I got back, I
Okay.
said I'm gonna stay in.
What assignment did you get when you came back?
Actually, I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey. It was fine. It's not the garden spot, but it was fine. I was an instructor, and it was
Were you just-
enjoyable.
Was it a drill instructor, or were you
Oh,
doing
no,
Scout
no.
Dog instruction?
No,
or-
no, I was an instructor in the weapons committee.
Okay.
Don't ask. That's just that's what the Army saw fit having me do.
Okay. Now, was the Army encouraging you to stay in at that point?
They weren't discouraging me.
Okay.
But the Army had, there was a lot of officers. So they were looking for ways to cut them. And the best way was education. A lot of good people who didn't have a college degree were rifted, for no other words to use, reduction in force. But that was the criteria.
Yeah. So where, some officers, including some very good ones who were in the Ripcord campaign, were Mustangs. They were men who
Yep.
come up from the ranks, and they're actually going to get demoted to sergeant at that
Yep.
point, regardless of what they had done,
Yep.
and that sort of thing. And that happened to a lot of captains wound up being sergeants. Now, you were a little different in the sense that you had the college degree. So you think that separated you from that group? Or?
He put me in a different class. I mean, they were looking, you have to have criteria. How are we gonna separate this person from that person?
Yeah.
And that was one of the criteria, education. Army's always been big in education. You gotta have the schools. You have to punch your school ticket or education ticket.
Okay. And so, how long did you have that assignment at Fort Dix?
A year.
When you've come back, and now you're at Fort Dix, you're in New Jersey, so you're not far from New York, Philadelphia, and things
Yeah.
like that. And now, the Vietnam, the anti-war movement had certainly gotten big and kind of taken over, and things were getting kind of crazy. Were you more aware of that now than you had been before, or was that still outside of your world?
I paid attention to it. I'm trying to think of when, of course, Kissinger was going to Paris. That's where they had the
Yeah.
peace talks set up. When did Saigon fall?
Saigon fell in 75.
75,
April 75. Nixon announced peace with honor in January of 73.
Right.
But
right.
you had some various bombing campaigns
Right.
and things in 72 before that.
And then when Nixon resigned, Ford's hands were tied.
Yeah,
He couldn't.
yeah.
He couldn't supply him with aircraft or anything. We were done.
Yeah.
Over with.
Okay. Did you encounter any kind of hostility from civilians when you got back? People treating you differently because you were in Vietnam?
No. I was fortunate. My family, my family, uncles and what have you, were all World War II, two veterans. The good war.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't have any choice. I wasn't going to go to Canada or anything like that. That was never on my list. But I think a lot of people went. When in the late '60s they went. When the war in 1965, who would have thought the war would have gone on that long?
Yeah. We're going the way that it did.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so a lot of that is really kind of on the fringes of your
Yeah.
experience. You've got a job to do and you're going and you're doing it.
Yeah.
Okay. And now, by this time, are you living at Fort Dix, for instance? Are you living on base or are you off base?
No, I had an apartment off base. But that's a military town. I can't even think of the town Fort Dix was in. Do you happen to know?
No, I just think of it as Fort Dix. Yeah.
It was in Bordentown, was it? I don't know. But it was a military town.
Yeah.
So there was acceptance.
Okay.
No hostilities. It wasn't San Francisco.
Okay. Now, what was your next assignment after Fort Dix?
I went to the Special Forces Officer course.
And where was that done?
Bragg.
Okay, so Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And how does that compare with the officer infantry training or the ranger training you had before?
A thinking man's course. You had to know what Special Forces did, and John Wayne didn't do him justice during his movie making. So, but Special Forces. We think of Special Forces today. There's so many. There's Rangers. There's SEALs. I think the Marines have a Special Forces course. It's the Special Forces was set up to train indigenous personnel.
Okay.
Now, can they fight? They can fight, but they need help. 12 people aren't going to fight anybody. Navy SEALs mission is a lot different than what a Special Forces A-team.
Yeah.
And if you're watching this tape, get a book out and read what the Special Forces A-teams do. The best example was the movie that just came out this past year, the 12 Men on Horses. That's what they do. That's what they do. They're there to assist and train indigenous personnel. Not that they can't fight, but they're not going to go kill Osama bin Laden. Let the SEALs do that.
Yeah, and that, I think a lot of people tend to, when you hear Special Forces, you tend to confuse that with the Navy SEAL type operations, the commando operation where you're sneaking in someplace behind
Special
enemy
Forces, they lump it all together. They lump it all together. Part of Special Forces is Operational Detachment Delta. That's equal to the SEAL Team 6. And of course, Hollywood's got a hold of that too. And
Okay. But certainly in Vietnam, there was a lot of training of indigenous peoples, and they did it in Laos as well.
Yep.
And of course, since then, they've done it in a lot of different places, including Afghanistan and Iraq. So, particularly Afghanistan, I expect. But yeah, okay. And so, your job was essentially, were you training people, or were you simply just part of an active unit, or what were you doing?
I was part of an A team for a while, which is probably the best assignment in the Army. Then you have to move on. You get promoted out, and you can still be in Special Forces, but you're more in headquarters and what have you.
But did you go out in the field any place, or did you do all your work in the U.S.?
I was mostly in the U.S.
Okay. I mean, did you visit any place else, or not you're going to talk about?
No, I didn't personally.
Okay.
I didn't go
Okay.
to South America.
Yeah.
No, my time was pretty much in the U.S. Training, a lot of training, various scenarios that you run through, but it was all in the U.S. I wish I could have gone, but I didn't. It just happened. That's just the way the nature of the beast was.
Okay. All right. And so how long did you do that work?
9 to 10 years in Special Forces assignment, where I branch transferred to SF from infantry.
Right. Okay. Now this, I'm using old-fashioned enough to be using tape, and this tape is about up. So okay, so you get making it out about 1983. You've kind of put in about 10 years with the Special Forces. How and why do you move on from there?
At the time, promotion. You make major. The slots for majors in SF are very small. So, but I'm speaking about that time and era. Now I'm not so sure. It's a completely different. Special operations is completely different. But at that time, major, I was promoted out. I didn't have a job. There was no slot for me. So I went back into the regular infantry. A lot of staff work.
Okay. Yeah. Now, do you get as you go through different rank levels, you get Army schooling of one kind or another, right?
Advanced course. In fact, I took the infantry advanced course, and then I did the armor advanced course correspondence. So I got those two advanced courses out of the way. Then Command and General Staff College, and I did not do the War College, which I'm sorry I didn't do it.
All right. Okay. So just to talk a little bit then about the assignments then after. So you go from Special Forces, you get your training stuff, and then what assignment do you get after that?
Well, then I went back into the infantry branch. From there, I became an instructor at the Command and General Staff College. They had a new course called CAS Cube for captains. Great course, like everything, it fell by the wayside, and they had something else that came up.
All right. Well, what did that course consist of?
A lot of practical work for captains, male and female. And that's when we had a lot of integration between the sexes. We didn't separate. It was just a good. It was a course to teach you to do staff work. You know, not everyone is gonna lead the horses in the charge. Somebody's got to take care of those horses. Somebody's got to buy them food or make sure they're well taken care of. And that's what CAS Cube, preparing captains for staff work.
Okay. All right. Now you mentioned having women officers in there. And in the 70s, when they started opening up more positions for women's officers and opening up the service academies and things like that, I mean, there was a lot of debate back and forth about the value of all of that. And in general, as more women got integrated, you also got problems eventually with sexual harassment and other kinds of things happening. and different people having different views of that. From your perspective, how well did the integration of women work, or what were the ups and downs of that?
I didn't see a problem, and I respected the women. Takes a special female person to make a career out of the military.
Yeah.
I had all the respect in the world for them. There's some smart women out there. They can do anything that the men can do, and I think that's proven today. Sexual harassment, I don't recall it being prevalent. It probably was there. More so maybe in the enlisted
Yeah.
ranks.
I think officers would sometimes will report just sometimes discrimination or prejudice. Some male officers would have a problem with it, others wouldn't, and so it just depends.
I think it depends upon your makeup.
Yeah.
I was a battalion commander, and I'd always have my head NCO, which was a female. She'd come into my office, and I'd say, "Close the door. Let's talk about this." Well, people say, "Don't do that. You better have somebody else in there."
Yeah.
Well, I really wasn't concerned. Maybe I should have been, but sometimes you want to talk, and you don't
Yeah.
want other people to know what you're talking about. Normally, it was about soldiers.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. And she was comfortable, good person. But that's how I am. But other people they'd have the door open, they'd have somebody else sitting in there. So I'm here. I'm not in jail.
Yeah. Just behaved like a civilized human being, and it took care of itself. Okay. All right. And so, I guess, where were you stationed then? I mean, after you taught your course for a while.
Fort Bragg.
Yeah, I think Fort Bragg.
Fort Jackson. FORSCOM headquarters in Atlanta, which doesn't exist anymore. That's Fort McPherson. That headquarters has moved to Fort Bragg. It's there.
So what does FORSCOM consist of? What was that?
That's Continental Forces of the United States. That's a 4-star. That's a 4-star slot. My boss happened to be my raider happened to be a civilian, but he was equal to a 3-star. It was a good assignment.
Is a lot of that really sort of administrative and logistical? Or?
Yes, it was more staff.
Yeah.
Not more, 100% staff work. We staffed when Desert Storm, the first one, we staffed that. We staffed that whole. All the units were looking for bodies to fill. They were not rounded out, so we had to come up with all those bodies, whether they came from the Guard or the Reserve or what have you.
Okay.
We had our hands full.
Because you're having to mobilize units and send them overseas, and typically in peacetime, units are not kept at full strength.
Yeah.
And so now they need people in these slots if they're going to function properly. So you not only take Guard and Reserve people, but then do you have to backfill some of them and replace some of them? Or does someone else do that?
No, we didn't backfill the Guard and Reserve because they were going back to the Guard and the Reserve.
Yeah.
Temporary assignment for them.
Or rather, did you have Guard and Reserve people come in and replace full-time active duty people?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, so how far do you get in terms of advancing in rank?
Colonel.
You went to Colonel. And when did you make Colonel?
When?
Yeah.
Well, I got out in 98. 96.
Okay. All right. Now, why did you retire in 98? Was that just...
30 years. That's, it's a young man's game.
Yeah.
It's a young man's game. And I had some opportunities. I wasn't going to be a general. I never set out to be a general, but I wasn't going to be a general. But that's fine. But I had some business opportunities, so
Okay.
and they worked out.
So what did you wind up doing when you got out?
I had a partner. I have a manufacturer's rep firm. I'm in the oil and gas business. He retired 4 years ago, so I have the business now. My wife wants me to retire, but I don't want to retire. I want to work. I'm 75. I don't want to sit home. I don't want to play golf every day. I mean, yeah, and I enjoy what I do. So that's the reason I work. You know, I don't have to work, but I enjoy it.
And you wound up settling in North Georgia just because you liked that area, or?
Yeah, we always came back to Georgia. Yeah, it's just a good area. North Georgia's. It could be anywhere. It could be Pennsylvania. It's that nice. So I'm happy with Georgia. Do I want to stay there the rest of my life? I don't know. I don't. Oh, people say, why don't you go to Florida? I want to change my clothes. I want to change my. You go to Florida, you don't change your clothes. I think you know what I mean. We have 3 seasons. We've got days of winter, but we have 3 seasons. So.
Okay. Now, to look back now at that time that you spent in the service, what basic way, how do you really think that affected you, or what did you take out of it?
I think it was. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I wouldn't trade Vietnam for anything. I wouldn't wish it on a lot. A lot of people were affected by it, and I didn't expect this, but what has been so good about Desert Storm, Afghanistan, and Iraq, people respect the soldiers. When they came back from Vietnam, they were looked down upon. Didn't bother me. There's things that bother me, things that don't bother me. But I felt sorry for some of those guys.
Yep.
They couldn't adjust into society. Maybe we all had PTSD. Probably all of us did. But I was able to assimilate back into society without any problem whatsoever. I didn't need a parade, but a parade probably would have helped. It's been so long, But that's so be it. You can't turn back the clock.
All right. Well, the whole thing makes for a pretty good story, and certainly an unusual one.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for taking the time to
Thank
share
you.
it.